Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we are joined by Yaser, who will be presenting his master thesis work on impacts of COVID-19 pandemic on traffic congestion and commercial vehicles travel patterns. Yaser holds a BSc in civil engineering from the University of Tehran, and after graduating, he joined Professor Roder's group in 2019 as a MASc student. His research interest is focused on analyzing changes in transportation networks using big data analytics. Yaser is also the former ITE president. So the presentation will be about 40 minutes, followed by question and answers. Yaser, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Usman, for the introduction. Good morning, all. Thank you for joining us today. I'm very grateful that I have the chance to present my master's thesis at the IT seminar. My master's consists of two parts. First, I've analyzed traffic congestion changes throughout the different stage of the pandemic within the Greater Toronto Hamilton area. And then I focus on commercial vehicle travel patterns in the whole area, and finally analyze these changes on the worst bottleneck in the GTHA. Oh, sorry. In this presentation, first I will discuss the background and motivation behind our study. Then for each part of the analysis, I will discuss the research question that I want to answer and briefly describe the data that we used. Then I will talk about the methodology that I used for this analysis and show you the result. At the end, I will discuss what we learned from this study and what can be done in future works. Let's first start to see why we need to analyze changes in traffic congestion. Traffic congestion imposes economic costs within the metropolitan areas. Based on INREX report, traffic congestion in top 10 congested cities in the US cost over $45 billion in loss of productivity in 2019. Time is money, and when it comes to supply chains and freight activities, the importance of time becomes more evident. Traffic congestion imposes a lot of challenges to freight and delivery services, due to reasons such as higher fuel consumption, more labor hours, and unreliable delivery times. Based on another study in the US, traffic congestion cost trucking industry $63.4 billion in 2015. Another report by Toronto Region Board of Trade points out that $3 billion worth of goods are transported by trucks through Toronto Waterloo Corridor every day. But congestion-related delays cost businesses around $600 million annually. So we can see the direct impact of the congestion on cost of deliveries due to longer truck operation hours. Supply chain planners tend to design the system based on normal pattern of traffic congestion. However, with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, things have been changed on the roads. Some roads that are normally congested can now become a potential route alternative or can be used at different time of the day that experiencing lower traffic. Different studies examine these changes the changes caused by the COVID-19 pandemic on traffic congestion around the world. In this part, we will review a number of these studies. Based on Geotab's analysis, in North America, traffic congestion almost disappeared in the early stage of the pandemic, and there was no difference in terms of travel times between weekdays and weekends. American Research Institute, or ATRI, analyzed truck movement in earlier stage of the COVID-19 pandemic in March 2020 in Atlanta, United States. The results show trucks were moving in most cases faster than usual due to reduction of traffic congestion and continuous 24/7 operation of trucks. Another research, which was conducted in Florida, shows that there had been a 47.5% reduction in Florida's traffic volume on March 22nd, 2020, compared to the same location in 2019. However, all these studies were conducted in the early days of the pandemic, when there were many uncertainties associated with the virus. So we decided to analyze the changes on the major freeways in the GTHA during the lockdown period and reopening stages of the first and second wave of the pandemic to see which road segments experience a rebound of traffic congestion. Now that we understood the importance of traffic congestion in supply chains, let's first look what was different for commercial vehicles in the past year. Since beginning of the pandemic, many cities have focused on personal trip behaviors and how mobility and ridership has been decreased because of the outbreak. But not many actually investigated the changes in commercial vehicles, even though these changes might be quite noticeable. What makes us say this? The short answer is changes in consumers' behavior. Since beginning of the pandemic, consumers' behavior and shopping habits have undergone dramatic changes. To give you a better sense of these changes, let's look at some statistics. Numerator conducted an ongoing survey since March 2020 to analyze consumers' COVID-19 related changes. The results show during the early days of the pandemic, not many people shifted to online shopping for products that they primarily purchase at stores. As you can see on the graph, only 8% of the respondents shifted to online shopping. But as time passed and lockdown became the new normal, things changed. By end of the year, more than 40% of the shoppers shifted to online shopping for products that they primarily bought at stores before the pandemic. Their analysis also shows that 87% of the shoppers placed online orders for delivery between March 2020 to December 2020. The result of these changes become evident when we look at the e-commerce sales record during the past year. In the US, e-commerce sales in 2020 increased 44% compared to 2019. The growth in 2019 was only 15% compared to the prior year. The increase in e-commerce sales is even higher in Canada, with a 70.5% increase compared to 2019. It is important to mention that changes in shopping behavior has a potential to be long-lasting, and all these changes in consumer shopping habits might lead to higher demand for delivery services, which eventually lead to which lead to increase in number of commercial vehicle trips on a daily basis. As mentioned earlier, many studies started to analyze changes that was caused by the COVID-19 pandemic on travel behaviors. Among those studies, the majority focused on the personal trip behaviors, and commercial vehicles were rarely analyzed. However, unlike passenger trips, commercial vehicle trips related to certain flight activities might have been increased during the pandemic. For example, in the early days of the pandemic, ATRI conducted a survey with collaboration of OOIDA, or Owner Operation Independent Driver Association, to analyze impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on trucking industry. The results show that in March and April 2020, truck activity was reduced, except for those involved in essential goods and medical supplies, which experienced increase in activity. Another research from China analyzes freight activities from December 2019 to August 2020. The analysis showed that COVID-19 pandemic increased road freight transport. However, these studies only analyzed the changes during the early months of the pandemic and did not take into account the second or the third wave of the outbreak. It is also important to remind that government measures were different in each country, which could impact freight activities in different ways. So, with all the backgrounds, let's start with the first part of the analysis, which analyzes the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on traffic congestion within the GTHA. At this part, we would like to see if implemented measures to contain the virus were aligned with the changes of travel speed within the region. We also would like to see whether after the reopening stages, traffic congestion rebounded to its pre-pandemic levels. And if we notice changes in travel speed, is it statistically different than pre-pandemic levels? And last but not least, what is the difference between the first and second wave of that pandemic in terms of traffic congestion and travel speed within the region? For this study, we use travel speed data on the freeways as a representation of traffic congestion. It is intuitive that when travel speed increases on a specific road segment, traffic congestion should be alleviated. The travel speed data was collected based on probe data from HERE Technologies, and the data could be categorized based on vehicle type, cars, and trucks. For this analysis, since we wanted to investigate the changes of traffic congestion in general, we decided to use both types of vehicles. The data include link ID, date, and time of the data, mean observed travel speed on each link, free flow speed, and length of the link. As you might know, free flow speed is the average speed at which a vehicle would travel if there were no traffic congestion. You can see a sample of this data in this slide. The study area includes major freeways within the GTHA. As you can see on the map, we analyze all the 400 series freeways, Queen Elizabeth Way, Don Valley Parkway, and the Garden Expressway. The time frame of this analysis is from January 1st in 2019 to March 11th in 2021, which includes both lockdown measures and reopening stages during the first and second wave of the pandemic, and also pre-pandemic condition. The methodology has 4 components. In the first step, we need to identify the peak hours during morning and evening. In order to magnify the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, we only wanted to select the most congested hour in the rush hours. We randomly selected 90 days in 2019 for all the freeways and visualized the travel speed within a 24-hour to identify the most congested hours. As it can be seen from the travel speed graph, the most congested hour during morning all starts from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. and during evening, 4 to 5 p.m. has the highest congestion level. The second part of our methodology is to select days that we wanted to analyze in this study. It was assumed that lockdown measures impacted workdays more than weekends. So among weekdays from Monday to Friday, we wanted to select those with consistent traffic congestion pattern to exclude any noise. After conducting a t-test on all the freeways for all the weekdays, we found that Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday have a similar travel speed pattern in most cases. Highway 401's p-value matrix is shown here as a sample. The third component of our methodology is to identify the congested hotspots on the freeways. In order to analyze the changes in traffic congestion, we needed to focus on the road segments that were frequently congested in pre-pandemic conditions. So in order to specify these freeway sections, we used Travel Time Index, or TTI. TTI is the ratio of travel time during peak hour to travel time when there is no congestion on the road. Since the length of each link does not change, we can express TTI based on travel speed. We have selected road segments that have TTI greater than 1.5 in more than 50% of the weekdays in 2019. And the last part of our methodology is to calculate the travel speed for aggregated road segments selected in the third step. Since different links have different length and different traffic volume, we weighted the average travel speed based on length and average annual daily traffic, or AADT. Since here data did not include information about AADT, we use an external data from MTO, which includes this information. But since here data's geographic designation differs from MTO, we perform a geographic matching process in ArcMap to assign AADT to each link of here data. We analyze all the bottlenecks. We've detected 39 bottlenecks in total based on peak hour and direction. We've analyzed all the bottlenecks to understand the changes during the pandemic. And for instance, let's look at the westbound direction of detected bottlenecks during the PM peak hour. You can see the majority of increase happened in the week of March 11th. For some bottleneck, travel speed increased by more than 300%. Interestingly, we noticed that by the time of the mandatory closure of non-essential businesses, travel speed was already at the highest level. This shows even before the government announcement, many workplaces might have already shifted to remote work format. The first 2 weeks of April, travel speed remained at the highest level, and then for some of the road segments slowly started to decrease after the first reopening stages in Ontario. But some, like the one at the Garden Expressway, the reduction was quite fast and started even before the reopening stages in May. You can see after October 10th, when Toronto and Peel region were rolled back to the modified second stage of reopening, travel speed on most of the bottlenecks started to increase again, but the highest increase since March happened when Ontario was put into the second stay-at-home order by end of the year. When we compare travel speed, in 2019 and 2020, we saw that before the beginning of the pandemic, meaning January to March 10, there was no significant difference in terms of travel speed on detected bottlenecks. After the reopening stages, travel speed started to decrease on most of the bottlenecks, especially during PM peak hour. We noticed that the rebound of traffic congestion during AM and PM were different. For instance, on average, travel speed on Highway 401 decreased by 26 km per hour during the evening peak hour, but during AM, the reduction was only 9 km. But even though travel speed decreased after the reopening stages, they were still significantly higher than pre-pandemic levels, except for 3 bottlenecks on the Valley Parkway, Garden Expressway, and Highway 400. As we mentioned, commercial vehicles might not have impacted the same way as passenger vehicles. It is possible that they had experienced in daily activities because of the changes during the pandemic. And the changes in traffic congestion might have incentivized them to reschedule their trips. So this brings us to the second part of our analysis, that we want to see how traffic congestion has changed in the first and second wave of the outbreak. We would like to analyze the changes in commercial vehicle travel patterns within the GTHA. In the first part, we analyze in this part of analysis study, we analyze changes in commercial vehicle activities using GPS data provided by Geotab. This data analyzes the number of daily trips made by commercial vehicles during the pandemic. The analysis is conducted in different timeframes to capture the changes in each stage of the pandemic. Since here Geotab's data can provide information about the activity type, we analyze each activity involved in goods movement to see which had the highest changes in terms of average number of daily trips during the pandemic within the GTHA. The GPS data collected by Geotab GO device, and this device has a capability to record numerous information about the vehicle, such as speed, engine status, and location. One of the major issues with the GPS devices is signal loss, meaning if the device gets disconnected from the network, no information will be sent to the server for further analysis. Interestingly, this device addressed this issue by having a built-in memory which can save the data and send it all once it's reconnected to the network. GPS data then will be saved on Google's big data warehouse called Google BigQuery. Once the data are saved, the first step is to analyze the vehicle's trips is to detect its stops. Geotab developed algorithm which detects stop based on speed and time threshold or engine status. So a stop is detected if the vehicle's engine is turned off or the vehicle has a speed less than 1 km per hour for more than 200 seconds. Once the stops are identified, an API or application programming interface has been developed to generate the origin destination matrix for a given set of variables. The API has a lot of flexibility in terms of user-defined variables, but I won't go into the details of all of them and only explain those I used in my thesis. The first variable is date. Since we conducted the analysis in different time frames, I will discuss it later in this results section. All the trips which are made within a day, meaning in 24 hours of a day, are selected. We only analyze trips made within the weekdays from Monday to Friday. And even though all the vehicles in Geotab database are for commercial purposes, not all of them are used for goods movement. Since the focus of this study is on commercial vehicles that are involved in freight activities, I only selected multi-purpose vehicles and trucks, which cover 86% of the total data. Another important variable in our analysis is called connector. Connector is, in general, is a road segment or a zone that the user can specify and ask the API to only return results of the trips that traverse the connector. One thing that I wanted to mention here is that when we use API, a connector in the API, we only have data from pre-pandemic conditions from January to March 2020. In our analysis, we use this variable to filter out trips related to Highway 401 between Highway 404 and Highway 427 on both directions. Geotab invented a multi-class supervised classification algorithm, which can categorize vehicles' activities into 16 different groups, which are called vocations. The algorithm is developed to only consider travel behavior, and information about vehicle type, class, and weight are not fit into the model. Since our analysis is focused on freight activities, in a specific part of our study that we wanted to narrow down our result to vocations, I selected 9 vocations, which are hub and spoke quick stops for activities such as on-demand delivery. These vehicles operate back and forth from a central hub and make quick stop prior to returning to the hub. These vehicles make a lot of short distance trips throughout the day. Door-to-door for activities such as door-to-door deliveries. Door-to-door vehicles serves many small neighborhoods at a time of and visits many areas that cover a wider geographic area. The vehicle typically has many stops throughout the day and drives short distances between these stops. For local quick stops for activities such as courier services, local quick stop vehicle make many quick stops in a local area, usually within a 3 to 5 mile radius. The trips might be in a star or tour-based topology, but the locations are very local. We group these as a last mile deliveries. Then we have a long distance vocation for activities such as long haul logistics. These vehicles operate over long distances, usually interstate. It has fewer stop locations than other vocations, and usually stop for a longer period after a trip. These vehicles are categorized into 3 groups based on their operation hours: daytime, nighttime, or those that operate in all 24 hours of a day. And finally, tour-based vocations for activities such as deliveries to retailers. These vehicles going point to point from a location to a location and spends a long time at these stops. Similar to long distance, operation of tour-based vehicles are also categorized into 3 groups based on operation hours: daytime, nighttime, and those operate in all 24 hours a day. This thesis is focused on the changes within the GTHA, as I discussed earlier. We analyze trips that have both origins and destinations within the GTHA. For privacy purposes, it is important to define origins and destinations within the GTHA that do not reveal activities related to a specific customer. So we use forward sortation areas, or FSAs, that are to define our origins and destinations. FSAs include the first 3 characters in the Canadian postal code. Since the boundaries of FSAs do not respect the regional boundaries in the GTHA, all the FSAs that have even a part within the GTHA are selected. In total, we have 218 FSA selected for further analysis. One of the major concerns when using GPS data from a specific data provider over a long period of time is to distinguish whether the changes in commercial vehicle activities are caused by the changes in demand, or it is simply because of the changes in number of vehicles and companies present in the database. For instance, imagine one year there might be 100 companies subscribed to the service, but the next year number of companies reduced to 80. When number of trips from the first year is compared to the second year, it is possible that the total number of trips recorded might have been decreased. However, these changes might not be due to lower demand in the second year. It might be due to the fact that fewer trips are being recorded in the second year because of the fewer number of companies subscribed to the database. So at the end, we have 2 options to address this issue. We can just go ahead with the data from all the companies in compared periods. Using this approach, we would raise the issue that I mentioned earlier. However, there is another explanation that the changes might happen because of the demand growth, because it can be assumed that increase in number of subscribers to the service is correlated with the demand changes. For example, when a company grows and needs to optimize its performance, they start a contract with Geotab and subscribe to the service for their data analysis purposes. Another option or another approach that we can take to solve this issue is to analyze data collected from long-term companies, meaning analyzing data from the companies which were subscribed to the service in compared periods. Even though in this option we address the bias that was mentioned earlier, we would only look at the subset of the companies that might not represent the whole changes in demand, as I said in the first approach. And since no additional information are available, I have applied both methods, and interestingly, the results have the same patterns, but with different magnitudes. In most cases, for instance, if a growth was noticed in option 1, the second option has also experienced a growth, but with a different magnitude. In this analysis, I use number of daily trips for each activity type to investigate the changes during each stage of the pandemic. Let's first look at the changes that happened during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. These line graphs show the average number of daily trips during each week of the year from January to July 2019, 2020, and 2021. The first one shows the first one shows changes when analyzing data from all the companies, and the second shows the changes when companies which were present in all the 3 years, or in other words, long-term companies. We can see up until week of March 10th in 2020, number of commercial trips was approximately 25,000 trips higher than 2019 figure 1. Soon after March 10th, number of trips in 2020 substantially decreased, and by March 24th, it was lower than pre-pandemic in 2019. We know that on March 11th, WHO announced the COVID-19 is a pandemic, and lockdown measures started in the same way, but the supply chain disruptions were already happening around the world. Week of April 7th has the lowest number of daily trips in 2020. Based on our traffic congestion analysis, early April 2020 was the peak of travel speed on majority of the road segments, so the result is consistent with our analysis. We can see average number of daily trips started to increase again after week of April 7th, and by May 5th, the average number of daily trips in 2020 exceeded 2019 both cases. Both cases of long-term companies and other companies. These graphs show even the number of commercial vehicles were affected by the outbreak, but the rebound was quite fast and happened in less than 2 months. To better understand the changes in daily activity, we focus on each vocation separately and conducted t-tests to see if the changes during the early days of the pandemic were significant compared to the pre-pandemic levels. We analyzed the changes from March 11th to May 19th in 2019 and 2020. The results show tour-based vocations experienced reduction in number of daily trips regardless of the operation hours, but especially those operated during the nighttime and all 24 hours of a day experienced a significant reduction, approximately 20% reduction on the daily number of daily trips. Tour-based vocations are involved in activities such as delivery to retailers, and during this time, we know supply chains were disrupted and stores were facing problems to stock the items. The reduction in number of daily trips might be related to what was happening during this period in 2020. Among long-distance vocations, only those operated in all 24 hours of a day experienced significant reduction by almost 26%. But we saw that, interestingly, number of daily trips associated with last-mile deliveries had different pattern. Unlike tour-based, number of daily trips related to last-mile delivery increased, especially for door-to-door vocation, which experienced a significant increase during the pandemic. Almost 8 months after the beginning of the pandemic, during one of the busiest time for commercial vehicles, meaning November 1st to December 25th, in 2020, Ontario was facing the second wave of the outbreak. Most businesses reduced their in-person activities, so people needed to shift to online platform to purchase for their holiday purchases. The result of these shifts can be seen when analyzing number of daily trips in 2020 and compared to the pre-pandemic levels. When we analyzed the data recorded from the companies which operated in both years, the results show that activity for all the vocations, like in total, looking at the big picture, increased by almost 5%, which increased the number of daily trips by 7,000 trips. And when we conducted the same analysis on data from all the companies, we saw a 12% increase, which increased number of daily trips by 17,000 trips in a day in 2020. Among all the vocations, long distance and tour-based vocation, again, those that did not operate in a specific hour and operate in all 24 hours of the day, experienced reduction during the pandemic. One reason that might explain these changes is that with the reduction of traffic congestion, some companies decide to have more specific operation hours since they could take advantage of low congestion levels during the days. Even though the increase might not seem to be very large, it is important to note that this is only based on Geotab sample, and we're looking at all the vocations. If we focus on different vocations, the increase can be higher. For instance, when we analyzed data for commercial vehicles that were involved in last mile delivery, we saw in case of analyzing data from long-term companies, the increase was almost 18%. And when we conducted the same analysis on all the data from all the companies, it was 33%. The results this shows us demand for last mile delivery was increased during this time, which might be the effect of e-commerce boom. We continued our analysis until the end of the second stay-at-home order in Ontario. The second stay-at-home order started from December 26 in 2020 and lasts until March 8th in 2021. But for our analysis, we started from January 1st to March 8th. The result from this part showed us tour-based and long-distance vocations operating during the nighttime experienced a dramatic increase. The increase was happening in all the periods, but during this time it was dramatic increase. And this happened based on both samples, meaning long-term companies and all the companies. The increase might be due to reduced exemption of noise bylaws that was happening during the pandemic. This regulation can limit activities that can be done during the nighttime. Similar to other periods, we can see tour-based and long-distance vocations, which operated without any specific operation hours, experienced decrease in number of daily trips. During this time, we know traffic congestion was again reduced, so it might be an incentive for the companies to reschedule their trips to have a more consistent travel schedules. The growing pattern for last mile deliveries also continued even this period. The results show that the average number of daily trips involved in last mile deliveries increased based on both samples, long-term companies and all companies. When we analyzed long-term companies, the increase of number of daily trips was approximately 17%. But when we analyzed data from other companies, the increase was 33%. Until now, we saw specific commercial vehicles experienced an increase in average number of daily trips during the pandemic, and some experienced reduction of in average number of daily trips. One of the major concerns with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic is how would traffic congestion would look like when the pandemic ends. During the pandemic, since traffic congestion was significantly lower than pre-pandemic conditions, changes associated with the increase of number of commercial vehicles might not be sensed by the road users. So in this part of our analysis, in order to analyze the changes that might happen during the pandemic, we narrowed down our analysis to the worst bottleneck in the whole GTHA. This corridor is a part of Highway 401 between Highway 427 and Highway 404. This road segments experienced TTI greater than 1.5 in more than 90% of the weekdays in 2019. In addition, based on average annual daily traffic data from 2016 serves more than 175,000 vehicles on each direction on a daily basis. And also, average annual daily truck traffic for this corridor based on MTO's data is more than 15,000 on each direction, which is higher than other bottlenecks. For this analysis, we use API's connector. As mentioned earlier, since we wanted to analyze the impact of the COVID-19, we needed to obviously have the data from pre-pandemic condition. The data available for pre-pandemic condition was only from January to March 2020. So that's why we have a time frame of January 1st to March 10th in 2020 and 2021. We analyze the changes on both directions. Since the patterns are very similar, I'll only show you the westbound direction of this in this presentation. The result from the samples acquired from long-term companies show on average approximately 2,700 commercial vehicles traverse this corridor, which is only 17% of the total vehicles traversing this corridor on a daily basis. So the changes can be magnified when we look at all the vehicles. We can see increases. The increases started from 11 a.m. to almost 11 p.m. with the highest increase from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Based on the long-term company sample, the total number of commercial vehicles traversing this corridor on a daily basis increased during the pandemic by almost 17%. During AM peak period, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m., the average number of commercial vehicles traversing this corridor decreased by 3%. But when we look at the PM peak period, 4 to 7 p.m., the total number of commercial vehicles increased by almost 14%. We analyzed, when we analyzed the changes from data recorded from all the companies, we saw in total the increase of number of vehicles increased by almost 26% on a daily basis. Number of commercial vehicles during AM peak period increased by 4%, but during PM peak period, the increase was approximately 22%. When we analyzed the activity type for commercial vehicles, we noticed that the highest increase related to those vehicles involved in last mile deliveries. This is very similar to what we discussed earlier for other time frames. In this study, we analyzed 39 road segments based on direction and peak hour. One of the important findings that was that the impact of the reopening stages was different on AM peak hour and PM peak hour. We also noticed that 78% of the road segments experienced a lower travel speed during the second wave of the outbreak compared to the first one. One important future step can be analyzing changes in traffic volume and cost saving associated with these changes during the pandemic. Even though travel speed gives us a detailed information about changes in traffic congestion based on travel time delays, the data do not contain information on traffic volume. Count data or traffic volume data can help us understand the economic impact of the pandemic in terms of congestion delays. Since the beginning of the pandemic, due to closure of non-essential businesses and people having the fear of contracting the virus, shoppers leaned toward online platforms to purchase their products, which resulted in dramatic increase in e-commerce sales. This has possibly impacted the commercial vehicles activities involved in, as we saw, this possibly impacted the commercial vehicles activities within the GTHA because, as we saw, commercial vehicles involved in last mile delivery experienced increasing different stage of the pandemic. Additionally, in different stage of the pandemic, it was noticed that average number of daily trips related to tour-based and long-distance location that operated in all 24 hours of a day experienced a reduction. On the other hand, the average number of daily trips related to tour-based and long-distance location which operated during nighttime, or especially those operated during the business hour, increased compared to the pre-pandemic levels. Focusing on the worst bottleneck in the GTHA, meaning Highway 401, between Highway 404 and Highway 427, in both directions, the result reveals that number of vehicles traversing this bottleneck has been increased dramatically compared to the pre-pandemic levels, especially during PM peak hours. One reason that might explain these changes can be a reduction of traffic congestion during the business hours and reduced exemption of noise bylaws during the evening and nighttime. With these changes, companies decided to reschedule their trips, as I said, to have a more consistent trip pattern. The exact reason behind these changes cannot be explained without additional information. But in either way, if the companies decide to continue their reschedule after the pandemic, road users might face worsened traffic conditions, especially during PM peak periods. Also, one of the main limitations of the analysis based on GPS data is lack of information on commodity type, weight, and goods value. The commercial vehicle surveys, CVS, conducted by Ministry of Transportation Ontario, is a valuable piece of data that can be infused to the GPS data to investigate commodity movement and freight activities during the pandemic for further economic analysis. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I would be happy to take any questions.